Hi guys, welcome to the channel. This is What If Goku Was in Fairy Tale. Before we start, remember to like and subscribe to help the channel. Also check the description for the creator of the fanfic. Chapter 39. The Red Key Arc Part 8. Big Balls. Now that is what I'm talking about. Riot cracked her neck, nearly drooling with excitement as she took in Makarov's gigantic figure. The master's magic, tainted by an unholy stink of demonic ki, flowed from him in enormous waves, distorting the air around him. Within him, Flute chuckled as she flexed her newest meat puppet. "Now this is impressive," she said. "This old man's body just boosted my strength to above a second-generation demon. I always wondered what that kind of power would feel like." She shuddered with dark pleasure. "I might even be able to be one of grandfather's sparring partners in the future. Oh, the things I could learn from him, the potential is stupendous." "Yeah, glad you're so happy wearing our father figure like a suit. Don't get too comfortable though, it's a rental. And the late fees, well, those are killer," Riot said snidely. "'Cause your gramps ain't showing up here, and you won't get to see him ever again." "If you say so, I think you might find my difference in power to be more than a match for you." "Well, you know what they say about counting chickens." Riot smirked. "Yo, Goku, sense our powers, how close are we? I'm curious." Goku furrowed his brow as his gaze darted back and forth between the two combatants. "Flute is stronger, but Makarov's power is really unstable right now. She won't be able to go all out until it's stabilized." "Oh ho ho," Riot chuckled. "Two-time limits for the price of one." "Two-time limits?" Flute tilted her head. "Nothing you need to worry your ugly, grandpa stealing head about. Just relax and let me put you down for your afternoon nap." "So many jokes from all of you mages." Flute sighed, shaking her head. "So much boasting and shouting that it never ends. Tell me, do you actually believe your own posturing, or is it merely a type of defense mechanism to hide the terror buried within your heart?" "Depends," Riot drawled. "Is your constant science babble a way to try and make yourself stand out more so your grandpa will actually notice you and satisfy your complex?" Across the city, Natsu and Gray suddenly snapped back to awareness as a thunderous crash echoed throughout the city. The two teens blearily looked at one another for a brief moment before groaning. They hauled themselves back up onto their feet and made their way towards the source of the sound. Goku, Loxus and Kagura peered down into the new crater that had been burned nearly 50 meters down into the ground. Seawater rushed into the hole, submerging Riot's form completely as Makarov's body floated over their heads. Flute took a few calming breaths before she really took in the new salt pond outside Magnolia. "Another ruined experiment," she sighed. "I must get these anger issues taken care of. I can't afford to keep ruining such interesting specimens before I even get the chance to perform any experiments. Well, I suppose I still have 3 subjects left, 4 if I can still find wherever I knocked my old host to. I suppose it will have to do." The demoness floated down to the remaining fairy mages and landed right in the middle of their ranks, shrinking down enough to stand level them with them. She turned to face each of the 3 one by one, looking them dead in the eye with a challenge twinkling in her gaze. Loxus moved first. His lightning fist bounced off of his grandfather's face with absolutely no effect, before he was almost casually backhanded away with a single swipe. The lightning dragon slayer felt his right arm pop out of its joint as he bounced across the sand, and he nearly bit his tongue in half, keeping his scream down. Flute flicked Goku's ki blast right back into his own face, then immediately shrunk down so Kagura's blade passed by harmlessly overhead. Then with a simple kick, Kagura's ankle shattered and all 3 fighters were down. "Now then, I believe I shall start with you, Son Goku. I am quite eager to see if there are any differences in ki users between universes." The demon paused and looked back towards the watery crater. "Interesting. She is far more durable than I had originally thought." The surface of the water all across the tiny pond began to bubble, with little pillars of steam twisting up sporadically. Riot rose up from the depths to hover over the boiling liquid, her arms crossed and her face fixed in a cold glare. But she did not rise from the water alone. Inky black tendrils erupted from her back and reached into the water, pulling out dozens of suits of armor, each and every last one that Urza had ever owned throughout her entire life. Even those that had already been destroyed throughout the course of Flute's invasion joined the horde, melted back together with dark magic. A small trickle of blood dripped down Riot's chin as she hovered quietly over the water. Her web of shadowy tendrils twitched as every last suit suddenly summoned its accompanying weapons, over 100 blades aimed straight towards the old man's face. Flute grinned wickedly and grew to Makarov's maximum size. Half a dozen suits rushed the giant straight off the bat, half towards the eyes while the rest went down towards the knees. Flute snagged two of the ones approaching her face and used them to smash the others out of the sky. Before the shattered suits had a chance to hit the ground, the giant leapt straight up into the air, dodging the other armors before they could land an attack. It wasn't until Flute was already in the air that she recognized the trap. A rainbow of colors lit up the night sky as Urza's elemental empress's armors hovered over Makarov's face, holding spheres of spiraling energy containing their respective element mixed in with darkness more potent than anything Mira had unleashed back in her prime. Demonic Warrior. Cataclysmic Wrath. The combined attack came down on the demon like the fist of God. A dozen colors mixed together into a single devastating vortex that struck the possessed man with enough power to punch straight through a mountain. The salt pond was turned to a glass crater, nearly tripling the size and depth of the hole Flute had left behind. Without even giving the demon an instant to recover, Riot raised her fingers like a conductor's baton, sending a platoon of her bulkiest armors to swarm over her. The possessed metal latched onto the giant and lifted him into the air like a ragdoll, and with a mighty heave the fused fighter sent Flute hurtling straight over the city. Riot met her in midair, mercilessly continuing her assault. She slammed into the giant with her web of armors whirling her body like a buzzsaw, tearing away at flesh and bone just as quickly as it could regenerate. A half-dozen tendrils suddenly converged, tangling themselves together and fusing their respective armors into a massive steel fist. The weapon came down on Makarov's head like a wrecking ball and sent him hurtling down into the ruined forest where Juvia had battled Goku and Loxus. The giant rolled to his feet as Riot charged in again with her armors, but this time Flute was ready. Rearing back, the giant clapped his hands together such force that a concussive wave erupted from his palms and sent the fusion hurtling backwards. The tendrils blew apart and the girl's armors went clattering across the ruined woods. That was quite the interesting technique. Very adaptable, and quite powerful. Not very durable though, is it? Flute commented as she stomped over towards the downed girl. Riot clambered back up and stared up at the giant. Flute brought her foot up to crush the fusion beneath her heel. All it took was a stiff breeze and the entire thing fell apart. Maybe next time you should ensure that you can absorb damage as well as you can dish it out. As the foot began to fall, Riot smirked. Thanks for the advice. The world around Riot exploded into shadows. A pure black cocoon exploded from her body and sent Makarov's body hurtling away. The armors and weapons rose from the ground as one, shrouded in an inky blackness that gravitated towards the swirling maelstrom that the fusion had created. As Urza's arsenal came together they began to bubble and shift, melting under the incredible pressure of Mirajan's dark magic. A multitude of colors bled together, merging into a single solid piece of rainbow-colored metal. The lines of energy burned magical runes up and down the structure's surface, setting fire to the air around it. Mixed with the dark aura, the red flames cast an eerie purple light, pushing the crimson coloring from the sky away. Then a pair of massive arms burst forth from Riot's cocoon. Flute started in surprise, but her shock quickly gave way to amusement. Her laughter was the soundtrack to the emergence of the legs, the shaping of the torso. Then the giants, Heaven's Wheel, and Purgatory armors all came into view alongside their signature weapons. Riot rose out of her construct as the trio danced around her, wrapping themselves into a fearsome helmet with feathery accents, reminiscent of a certain Norse god. Demonic Warrior. Juggernaut. The massive armor stood eye to eye with Makarov, a combination of everything Urza and Mirajan had to offer, all thrown together into their ultimate weapon. And Flute couldn't be happier. Yes, the ultimate test for my new form. Come at me, show me your power. Come at me with everything you have, hold nothing back. It will make your fall all the sweeter. Inside the helmet Riot thrust her arm forward and her weapon responded in kind. The Flame Empress armor that had melted down into the Juggernaut's left palm glowed and a massive fireball engulfed the Guild Master's form. The old man could only scream for an instant before an iron fist slammed into his jaw and cut off his cry. Flute staggered backwards in pain and Riot raised her other hand, unleashing a torrent of water strong enough to split stone. The demon sputtered as she tried to escape the deluge, firing off a blast of dark magic in Riot's general direction. Riot cancelled her attack and sidestepped the blast, but before Flute could regain her bearings the fusion snapped her fingers and suddenly Makarov's body was covered in a sheet of ice. A wreath of lightning exploded into existence around Riot's fist. Flute could only watch helplessly trapped within Riot's trap as the electric punch came down square on her jaw, shattering the ice and sending her bouncing away into a pile of ruined trees. Snarling, the demon snagged one of the waterlogged trees and sent it hurtling towards Riot like a makeshift javelin. The fusion watched impassively as the piece of wood bounced harmlessly off of her chest plate before she fired off another fireball. Flute had Makarov rolled beneath the attack, and with a roar she leapt up into the air, planning on tackling the metal monstrosity to the ground. Except, she never came back down. Flute twisted around in shock as she slowly floated upwards, floundering helplessly as she failed to find any purchase. A small yellow cloud zoomed past the Titan's face, and there was Kagura, propped up between Goku and Loxus with an intense look on her face as her gravity powers went all out. Lightning Kamehameha, demonic warrior, cutting evil. The blue and yellow beam flew alongside a glowing purple spear made of pure magic. 4 of the most powerful mages in Fairy Tail unleashed everything they had at their possessed guild master. Unable to dodge, Flute merely smiled to herself. Truly fascinating subjects. A massive cloud of smoke had been kicked into the air as the combined attack detonated. Laxus peered impatiently through the veil, trying to spot any sign of whether or not the demon had survived. From her vantage point, Riot shared his attitude. "Yo Spike Head, you pickin' anything up?" It took Goku a few seconds to realize who she was talking to, but when he did it was with a frown on his face. "Their power signature is gone, but something isn't right. It felt like it disappeared before our attack hit." "What? Like they teleported or some shit? Then what the hell did we hit?" "No, Gramps can't teleport." Laxus grunted. "He's barely even got any defensive moves at all, usually he can just shrug everything off. Hell, the only defensive move I think he knows is, oh shit." As the smoke began to clear, a yellow sphere came into view. The kanji for demon was inscribed on the side, and within lay Makarov. The old man appeared to be frozen inside, but his body was completely undamaged. Then, the bubble shattered. Flute landed lightly on her feet, stretched out her neck until it gave a satisfying crack. "So, that was the fairy sphere, Flute purred. "Using time displacement as a shield, what an idea. I can see why your guild has classified it as one of your 3 great magical powers. Best of all, when combined with my own abilities, I can perfectly control its level of power and stop myself from going hurtling a few years into the future. A bit more draining than I had expected. I shouldn't have underestimated the stress of such a technique. Though, I suppose with my own modifications it isn't really the fairy sphere anymore. How does Demon's Cage sound? The first of my own 3 super techniques. Are you ready to try out the rest?" "Holy hell," Gray murmured. "They're all fighting Makarov. You know what that means, right? That bitch, taking Lucy wasn't enough, now she's even gone and possessed Gramps. How the hell are we even supposed to stop her now? And what the hell is up with that giant tin can down there?" I stopped looking for explanations somewhere around when all those monsters appeared. Gray shrugged. "Right now, we just need to figure out how to help them all out. We can't do anything if we just charge in. Screw that, we can't just sit around here waiting. Those monsters have practically torn the city apart. How many people did we have to step over to get this close? How many of those people do you think are still alive? Half the city is on fire right now, Gray." Natsu paused for a moment and looked back at the city with slowly widening eyes. "Half the city is on fire," he whispered. An ember of excitement ignited behind his eyes. "Oh yeah, let's do this." "Hold on man," said Gray, staring at him sidelong. "Are you sure that you can absorb that much fire at once?" "No, but I am starving," Natsu said cheerfully. Then he began to inhale. Across the city, demons and monsters alike were suddenly forced to dodge aside as waves of fire leapt up from their burning husks of the city and flew towards the edge of the flooded woods. The flames poured down Natsu's throat and his stomach began to expand, doubling, tripling, and quadrupling in size without any sign of slowing down. Soon he was the size of a house and Gray had to jump out of the way to avoid getting crushed by his expansion. He kept it up until every last trace of flame had been extinguished from the city, and then he squeezed. The fire vanished into his magical core, and suddenly every single muscle in Natsu's body went tense. He stood a frozen statue, without even a heartbeat. Then his power exploded, scale patterns burst to life all across his skin and his eyes shrank to reptilian slits. Slowly he exhaled, and his tension faded. The pink-haired teen sent his typical cocky grin towards Gray and rocketed towards the battle. Fire Dragon's Iron Fist. Riot heard the familiar battle cry and instinctually stepped back out of the way as a pink-haired missile caught her opponent square in the eye and melted the eye jelly into caramel. Flute reared back, roaring in pain. Riot made quick work of the opening, dashing in to grab the stumbling giant and suplexed him into the ground. Natsu leapt right on top of the head of Riot's Juggernaut and took a deep breath. Fire Dragon's Roar. As the flames burst forwards towards Makarov's prone form, the Flame Empress armor within the Metal Knight began to glow and the stream doubled in size. Showing surprising agility, Flute had Makarov's body roll clear of the attack the instant before it arrived. The old man was on his feet again in an instant, thrusting his palms forwards to unleash a brilliant stream of light. Natsu jumped clear as Riot blocked the strike with one of her gauntlets. Off to the sides, Goku, Laxus and Kagura watched the battle. Kagura leaned heavily on archenemy like a crutch while Goku and Laxus nursed all sorts of cuts and bruises. With their energy reserves all running low, the three could do little more than cheer on their comrades as they tried to work out how to get back into the fight. Gray ran up to the bunch, panting lightly as he pulled up to a stop beside them. "Hey guys, what the hell is going on here? What's with the giant armor?" Urza and Mirajan fused together. Goku said simply. Gray's jaw clicked shut with an audible snap before he turned to look at the Juggernaut a second time. "Yeah, that makes sense." He nodded, his internal BS meter fizzling out. "Right, what's the plan here? I'm about out of juice and you guys all look even worse off." I think I might have a plan." Goku said slowly. "Gray, Lucy is somewhere on that beach, do you think you could find her?" Probably yeah, what for though? You don't think she can help here, do you?" "No, but if Flute isn't controlling her anymore, she might be able to close that portal in the guild hall before any more demons show up. Then we just have to deal with the ones here, no extras." "I can do that." Gray nodded. "What about you three though?" "Kagura's pretty much out of it at this point, she's just here to see how it ends. Laxus is looking for an opening and I have an idea. See you guys soon." With that, Goku dashed off deeper into the woods towards the border of the remaining forest with its flooded counterpart. Gray looked over at the other two mages, and when he saw that they looked just as confused as he was, he just rolled his eyes and turned back towards the beach. "Right, I'm on it, just make sure that Flame Brain doesn't get himself snuffed out in there while I'm gone." Laxus shrugged. He's with Urza and Mirajan. With how responsible the two of them always act all the time, I can't see their fusion let him go too nuts. "Eat magic flaming sword, you wrinkly old bastard," Riot roared. The Juggernaut clapped its hands together in an explosion of purple flames, and when they came apart, a hilt had emerged from the burning demonic power. With a mighty heave, Riot ripped the entire sword from the flames, revealing a flaming buster sword the size of an apartment building. In response, Flute sheathed Makarov's hands in a wreath of white energy and punched the incoming blade. The pair bounced away from one another, and in the gap flew Natsu, unleashing another stream of fire that ignited Makarov's hair. The giant frantically tried to pat out the flames, leaving himself wide open as Riot drove her blade through his thigh. Roaring in pain, Makarov collapsed to his knees and slammed his fist into the ground, kicking up a wave of dirt and magic that forced the two back. From the sidelines, Laxus grinned at the opening he was suddenly presented with. "Can't dodge with that leg." The lightning mage threw his hands into the air and a massive yellow glyph burst into existence above Flute's head. "No chance of collateral damage all the way out here. Sorry Gramps, I wanted to fight you head to head, but it looks like I won't be getting the chance." Fairy Law. Makarov vanished within the pillar of light that crashed down into the field. His skin blistered and bubbled as his body racked with pain under the intense magic. It was this pain, this agony, that finally pushed Flute's connection with Makarov to its fullest potential. With her power fully connected to his, the possessed guild master erupted. With a furious roar, the man shattered Fairy Law in a swirling mixture of white and black magic. The behemoth kicked a ruined tree up into his hand and launched it like a spear straight towards his grandson. Just over halfway there, the weapon suddenly slammed down straight into the ground. Flute's eyes immediately locked onto Kagura, whose arm was still outstretched. Before she could react, a stream of black magic crashed into her side and sent her bouncing across the forest floor until she crashed top speed into a fallen log. Finally pushed beyond her limit, the girl slumped to the ground unconscious. With the distraction out of the way, Flute turned her attention back towards Laxus. Riot and Natsu had regrouped besides the lightning mage, and the demon glowered darkly at them. With her eyes locked onto Laxus, Flute raised her arms into the exact same pose that he had used just moments before. A black symbol more than twice the size of the fairy law carved itself into the sky, and the mages were nearly knocked off their feet by the air pressure alone. Riot began pushing power through the adamantine armor, hoping to shield her comrades, but before she could do anything, Laxus pushed past her, his eyes burning with rage. With a snap of his fingers, every last segment of the Thunder Palace fell to the ground. Upon impact, they shattered, and suddenly their magic was free. From all around the city, over 200 separate bolts of lightning flew across the city and into Laxus' body. His veins pumping with enough power to crack a mountain, the lightning mage looked up at the symbol in the sky and spoke out at the exact same time as the demon. Thunder Palace. Ragnarok. Demon's commandment. The two beams collided in midair and the world went white. Natsu groggily blinked the spots from his eyes as he tried to regain his bearings. The clash between the lightning and dark magic had blasted him straight off of his feet and sent him hurtling across the clearing. With a low moan, he forced himself back onto his feet and surveyed his surroundings. Laxus had been directly beneath the blast, and now he was sprawled out on the ground, his skin blistered like someone who spent hours unprotected beneath the sun. Riot hadn't so much as moved an inch from the clash, protected by the Juggernaut armor and its adamantine pieces. Directly across from her stood Flute. Cuts and bruises covered Makarov's body, but with each passing second they were fading away. With his full power, the only last mark that Laxus was able to leave behind was in the form of the old man's mustache, half of which had been burned clean off. Damn it all, what the hell is it going to take to make you stay down? ? Riot roared as she charged forwards, her giant sword held high. As the blade arced downwards, Flute shrunk down to Makarov's normal height, laughing to herself as the blade passed harmlessly overhead. Flute dashed between the Juggernaut's legs and returned to her giant form. Riot wasn't able to turn around fast enough before Flute had grabbed her by the crotch with one arm and the back of the head with the other. The Juggernaut was lifted straight off of the ground, and slammed down head first. The massive suit nearly snapped at the neck from the impact and was only held together by yet another surge from the fusion's reserves. Flute watched as Riot tried to pull her weapon back together, a hint of amusement on her face at her obvious advantage. Natsu tried to rush from the side, but with synchronization came far greater reaction time. The giant grabbed the dragon right out of the air, and with a hearty heave she threw him straight up into the air. Throwing a hand towards the sky, the demon fired a ball of pure white magic towards Natsu as he began his descent. Snarling, Natsu let loose a stream of fire from his palms, blasting through the sky like a jet fighter around the attack and straight down towards Flute's head. Moments before impact he clapped both of his hands together and summoned up every last dredge of magic that he could. The teen was engulfed in flames as he hurtled like a meteor, far too quickly for Flute to evade again. Crimson Lotus. Exploding Flame Blade. Natsu's strongest attack crashed into the demon at full strength, sending the giant toppling backwards, howling as her flesh was charred. Natsu landed lightly on his feet and inhaled as much air as he could. Fire Dragon's Roar. Flute shrank Makarov down yet again and leapt up out of the way of the attack. It wasn't until she had leapt over the flames that she saw Natsu bearing down at her from above. The first attack had been a diversion, setting her up to be unable to dodge the second. The ingenuity of a desperate human never failed to fascinate her. Fire Dragon. Iron Fist Barrage. Natsu slammed the demon back towards the ground and landed on top of her, and began to attack, punching again and again with every ounce of his anger focused on reducing her face into a bloody pulp. After the fourth strike he felt a small hand latch onto his wrist and begin to squeeze. Natsu twitched in pain and tried to punch his way free, but his other hand was caught just as easily. The teen snarled at the demon wearing the old man's skin, and she smiled right back before she opened her mouth far wider than should be possible, completely unhinging her jaw. A bright ball of energy began building within his mouth and Natsu responded the only way he knew how. Fire Dragon's Roar. Flute idly brushed the ash off of her clothes as she strolled away from the unconscious dragon slayer. Her flesh was slowly stitching itself back together and the painful scabs that had almost instantly formed over the burns were falling away one after the other. Her attack had easily punched through Natsu's with minor blowback, and with him out of the fight there was only one thread left on the field. The Juggernaut was back up, but rather than grow to match it, Flute merely allowed a trickle of light magic to start gathering in her fingertips. Your wounds aren't healing as quick now. I think it's about time we wrap this up. Riot bellowed. Yes, I suppose that my reserves have been taxed a bit more than I would have liked, but it hardly matters. I'm still far too powerful to be defeated by the likes of you. Flute replied coyly. She sidestepped as the fusion tried to crush her beneath the behemoth's boot, then dived back out of the way of a swing from Riot's oversized sword. Flute hopped up onto the Juggernaut's wrist and began running up its arm at top speed, straight for the helmet. She made it halfway up before Riot's other arm came around and tried to crush her like an obnoxious mosquito. The demon was forced to hop back down to the ground, but by now her magic was swirling around her hands. 10 spears of light burst forth and impaled the Juggernaut through its joints, locking it in place. Flute hummed happily as she launched herself back up to the giant armor's head and carefully grabbed onto its lower jaw. Then she slowly began to dial up the pressure, pulling harder and harder on the metal until it began to groan beneath her. With a final heave, she tore the helmet aside and tossed it behind her, effectively decapitating the weapon. She was then promptly gut-punched for her trouble. Riot followed up with a flying kick to the throat that knocked both of them clear of the giant as it began to crumble. As they both bounced off of some fallen trees, Flute rolled up to her feet and blurred across the distance separating the two. Now then, I believe I have one final experiment that your participation will be most critical in. I'd like to see what happens when a fused being dies. It has literally been all I could think about this whole time. Riot's eyes widened as Makarov's glowing fist was rammed right into her chest, but before she could even process the damage, the demon intoned 2 more words. Demon's Gleam. A beam of light exploded out of Riot's back, the exit wound of a hole large enough to shove her own head through. The fusion stood gasping, desperately trying to fill lungs that no longer existed. Her figure began to distort, coming in and out of focus like static on an old TV. She reached out her hand towards Flute for reasons that neither could fully understand before she just popped. Urza and Mirajan fell to the ground in her place, each sporting bloody wounds across the chests. Flute surveyed the two for a moment, pleasantly surprised to discover that they were still alive. The wound is even non-lethal. How fascinating. It seems that they used what magic they had left to mitigate the damage and then shared what was left of their wound across both of their bodies so that they each could live. This certainly warrants further studying. Perhaps it could be applied to reusable kamikaze troops. What do you say, Son Goku? She had sensed him rushing back towards the battle the instant the Juggernaut had started to fall, but it was too little too late. Now, time to see what kind of reaction she could draw from him when she presented all of his comrades' current positions. She turned to greet him with a wide smile that instantly froze on her face once she caught sight of him. Goku's face was scrunched up in a look of pure rage, his body visibly shaking from his desire to tear her apart. Far more importantly though, his arms were both held straight up above his head where he had suspended a gigantic ball of blue ki, large enough to crush a house beneath it. Get away from them. Spirit Bomb. The blue sphere shot forwards and Flute desperately threw her hands up in an attempt to ward off the attack. It crashed into her with all of the force of a semi, pushing her backwards away from the girls despite her best attempts to keep them within the blast range. Sweat began pouring down her face from the strain of holding back the blast, and she could feel Makarov's old heart begin to stress under the pressure. She could feel Goku pouring ever greater amounts of his ki into the blast, and she knew under no uncertain terms that should it detonate she could not survive. Grahhhhhhh. The demon slipped one of her hands down, getting as low as she could on the sphere before she slowly started to grow. The change in size did nothing to alleviate the pain of holding back the attack, but it did allow her to gain greater purchase. Raaaaaaaaaaah. Putting every ounce of her strength into the movement, Flute twisted her body around and threw the spirit bomb off of its intended path. The sphere went spiraling upwards, growing smaller and smaller as it vanished towards space. Panting, Flute turned back towards Goku, who could do nothing but stare back in dumbstruck horror. The demon allowed a tired grin to spread across her face. Checkmate. Thanks for listening. If you want the next part of this video, be sure to like, subscribe and comment and hit that bell notification. See you next time.